right here is the reason why Africa will never develop.
Not yet. Mazima.
How can the young people of Africa be led by leaders who are 2 feet away from their graves and still find it okay and accept it and stay quiet and do nothing about it?
Welcome to This Week in Africa. Today we're talking about the 92-year-old dictator in Cameroon who is running for re-election and many more stories. This is a collaborative effort between Authentic Africa and the African storyteller, the Gloria Ayo, where we break down this week's breaking news and impact on Pan-Africanism and Africa's independence. As we mentioned, today we're talking about the running again of the president of Cameroon, and we have a number of other stories from the Africa Summit, the aftermath of the Africa Summit at the White House. The former president of Nigeria, Buhari, passes in London. South Africa's 30% tariffs and the aftermath of that. Kenya's visa-free travel, and a number of other stories from around the continent. Before we get into each of our stories, we'd like to do some introductions. So I'll turn it over to my co-host for hers.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gloria Ayo. Happy to be back. I'm a digital content creator. I'm very passionate about telling our stories as accurately as possible. And always great doing this with Joe. Thank you for having me again, Joe.
Absolutely. Always excited to have you.
Thank you.
I am Joe Hatagwa, founder of AuthenticAfrican.com website, where we make products available to you that are ethically sourced and handmade from around the continent. Also, the platform on social media is all about bridging the gap between the diaspora and the continent of Africa with 3 main goals: to get people to visit, move, and invest in the continent of Africa. So with that, let's get into today's stories. A couple people are on saying hello. They said that people need to revolt. And also Red says she loves the channel. Thank you, Red.
Oh, we love you. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so as you saw in that opening, we're going to talk about Cameroon and President Biya, or Biya, but we will also talk about others as well, because Cameroon is not the only country that's dealing with the same issue, and we'll tie it into other stories that we're all happy about on the continent. There's going to be some discussions there before we end this block. So let's get into the main story here. As I mentioned, Cameroon's president, Paul Biya, 92, announces that he is going to run for another term. He's the longtime leader of Cameroon. He's officially announced he'll run again, and ending months of speculation. There's been questions about him disappearing from time to time over the last couple of years, his cognitive abilities, that might mirror some things you might have seen in the United States over the last 4 years. But I think it's on a whole nother level, and we'll talk about it and get into it. He's the world's oldest serving head of state currently, and obviously announced his plan to run again. That would be extending his 43 years already in power. So let's get to this video, and we will have some commentary on the other side.
He's ruled Cameroon for over 4 decades. Now 92-year-old President Paul Biya says he's running again. The long-serving leader ended months of speculation with a social media announcement declaring his intent to seek another term and promising the best is yet to come. But critics aren't buying it. One human rights advocate called Biya's move a sign of Cameroon's stalled political transition. Biya last won re-election in 2018 with over 70% of the vote, in a contest marred by low turnout, fueled by separatist and jihadi violence and widespread irregularities. His decades in power have been marked by corruption allegations, crackdowns on dissent, and a violent secession crisis in the English-speaking regions that shattered schools and sparked deadly clashes. He's also battled health issues, often seeking treatment abroad, raising questions about his ability to lead. Paul Biya is Africa's second longest-serving president, and it appears he may not be done yet.
Africa's second longest serving president. So we've had presidents in Africa that have served longer. Gloria, love your thoughts on him announcing that he'll run again.
Surprise, surprise. So you actually had it right the first time, Biya.
Biya, okay.
Yeah, no, it is what it is. It can be very confusing. But anyway, Biya is good friends, interestingly, with Emmanuel Macron. That's something I find very interesting. Mm-hmm. And him saying he's running again due to numerous and insistent calls for him to run is it's quite laughable. So I just want to ask the people of Cameroon, who are those behind the numerous and insistent calls asking Paul Biya to stay in power? Because we need to know where to begin from, right? We need to know where to begin our recommendations from. I do know of some traditional chiefs, mostly in the South, who are publicly backing him. And this shows his regional base. But who else in Cameroon is insisting that Paul Biya should be president? Anyway, since his ascent to the throne in 1982, Biya has always found, should I say, creative ways to make the constitution serve him. Cameroon was a de facto single-party state until the early 1990s, when political pressure forced Cameroon to start having multi-party elections. And even then, Biya removed term limits in 2008, which actually explains the continuous re-election. So every election cycle has come with allegations of fraud, low turnout, and crackdowns on people. And this isn't without precedent. In other parts of Africa, such as Uganda with Museveni, which we discussed just last week, and Equatorial Guinea's Obiang, who has been in office since 1979 and is Africa's longest serving leader. We've just always, it's actually become quite the expectation in Africa, unfortunately. Now, people who support Biya will tell you that he offers stability, especially for issues such as the crisis in the Northwest and Southwest regions. But the question from me to them is he the only one who can actually fix these issues? Because, I mean, if in fact those issues have been fixed, if nobody else in Cameroon can do it, how great of a leader has Paul Biya been? Because under him, Cameroon has expressed GDP growth thanks to oil and cocoa, but the benefits haven't trickled down to the people. And there are allegations of corruption and mismanagement. Anglophone regions remain in crisis. Schools are closed. Civilians are displaced. And then, as far as the opposition, it's not that he doesn't have people, you know, trying to debate or contest or run against him, but they've not been able to oppose effectively because Biya controls the electoral mechanisms and security forces. And so, sadly, goes the story of Cameroon under this man.
Well put. I mean, look, if the man has been in power for 43 years, he has created an ecosystem and an echo chamber and a platform that would not allow for dissent or anyone else to be able to run against him, right? I mean, he's just obviously been able to consolidate power. And as you mentioned, made a change to the Constitution, even, as you said, extending the age, right? And allowing for specifically him to continue to stay in power. And, you know, look, you know, we don't want to be ageist, but here's the thing, right? In many countries, you have a minimum age that you can run for the president or head of state. Why not have a maximum age? You know, when it comes to driver's licenses and other things, heavy machinery, a lot of times they want to check your cognitive ability as you age, because as you know, those things decline. You know, when I was in middle school, I remember to help us understand what it's like to be a person that's elderly, we wore gloves with cotton in the fingertips. We wore glasses with Vaseline on the glasses to show you what it might be like to be a person of that age so that you can be empathetic to those folks. Wow. Now, that helps you understand what it might be like to be at that age. Now, imagine someone now running a country, you know, 20, almost 30 years above the global agreement on retirement age, right? So just those things are some things to think about. And I say all that coming into this next video because there was a U.S. Africa Leader Summit in December of 2023. So at this point, he was still in his 80s, where Cameroonian President Paul Biya agreed, he was 89 at the time, experienced an episode widely described as embarrassing and troubling by both social and traditional media. Footage circulated online showing him entering the summit visibly confused and disoriented. He appeared unaware of his surroundings, and he did not seem to recognize where he was and what was expected of him. It was caught on camera. He had an exchange with his aide. He reportedly asked, "Oh, wow, so I've become a celebrity? Who are these people present?" and showed uncertainty about whether he was to deliver a speech. Observers noticed that he seemed dazed and confused, and at one point was unable to respond when his name was called, leading some to speculate about his cognitive state and ability to govern. So now imagine that was when he was 89. That was in 2023, and he is talking about running in 2025 again for presidency, which, by the way, at the end of the next 2 terms, he'd be 100 years old. So if he was to, obviously survive that long in office. So with that, let's jump into this video. This video went viral. You guys might remember it. I remember it. This is when I became aware of President Paul Biya. It was watching this video. So let's take a watch.
President of Cameroon, Paul Biya, is suffering from memory loss. The man was at the US Africa Summit last month, and he had no idea where he was or why he was there. I think he has dementia, and it happens to the best of us. Nobody is making fun of him. He will be 90 next month. He has lived a long life. Nobody is making fun of his health challenges. But those who surround the man clearly don't have the fear of God. I don't think they really care about the man. Otherwise, he would have stepped down a long time ago. The whole world doesn't need to see him being embarrassed. He's embarrassing himself and Cameroon on a world platform. It shouldn't be.
Wow, so I become a celebrity. That's what that said. You guys can't read it. Who are all these people present? Why? I didn't ask for this. Are there important personalities among them? Then his aide says, "Yes, President Kagame just spoke, and it's your turn. You have the microphone." There are ministers in the room. Your mic is on. You have And so he says, "Okay, so you mean I should speak now?" And he says, "Where?" And they say, "Yes, you can do it sitting down." He said, "Here? Why?"
I mean, it's so sad. The man just sat there. He farted. He kept looking at the pamphlet in his hand for minutes. That is supposed to be his speech. Then he farted again in public. He put down his pamphlet. His aide came back to prompt him to speak.
All right, so you guys got the idea. I mean, Gloria, thoughts, please. That's what I'll say. You're on mute. I think you're on mute, Gloria.
I'm sorry. I said somebody said we finally found the Black Joe Biden. And to you, I say, wow, Pittsburgh, dude, you are violent, so full of violence. But really, this isn't to mock decrepitude because we can only hope to age as gracefully as possible. But videos like this go viral because of just how bizarre it is that someone chooses to be in power when they should be retired and resting. And it's the reason there is such a thing as retirement age. You may not be in control cognitively and physically as you once were. So it's less about the actual incident and more about what that moment represents. Mm-hmm. Know when to leave. It's even in your own interest. But you see, the hunger for power, especially on the African continent, is why we keep having moments like this one. And I mean, imagine just being on a stage like that, and you're supposed to be representing your continent, and that's what you put out there. My goodness. And yet he claims that he has a lot of calls and people just wanting him to run again. Wow.
Yeah, I think that's indicative of him wanting to keep power, right? Because it's obvious that he should have stepped down. And, you know, there's been some parallels made in the United States. It's happened with the previous two presidents, right? There are a lot of folks who believe that the both of them are past the age in which they should be running the country, right? I mean, people on both sides feel that way. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, that conversation has been happening in the United States, and those guys are 10 plus years younger than Paul Biya, right? And so just keep that in mind. And the man is 92 years old. This video is from when he was 89. And yeah, obviously that video, you know, went viral. You know, the commentary was funny, etc. But it really is sad to see this is the state. And this, again, leads to why Africans are not taken seriously a lot. Because imagine when he meets with other leaders of foreign countries, what they're perceiving Africans to be like and who they perceive Africans to choose as their heads of state, right? So with that, I want to move on to, you know, the conversation about the old guard and the new guard. So, of course, on the continent of Africa, we always talk about respecting our elders, right? I remember from a very young age, was always taught, respect your elders. In America, in American South, I know it's a very important thing as well. It's a very, very important thing in African households, regardless of where you're from in the continent. But what happens when those elders are clinging to power, fumbling at global summits, you know, releasing on themselves on national TV, while the continent they leave suffers under the weight of neocolonialism and corruption? So it isn't about age, it's about leadership or the outrageous lack thereof. So from South Sudan's, you know, president to Cameroon's, you know, some people also mentioned Nigeria. I saw on this, you know, this live stream in the comments, too many of our leaders are clearly out of touch or unfit or both. Meanwhile, Africa's real hope is emerging not from the old guard politics, but from the bold, mostly young, unapologetic generation of Pan-African leaders reshaping the future. So we talk a lot about Burkina Faso here, and Ibrahim Traoré, you know, is building a state gold refinery and shutting down foreign looting. In Niger, General Chiani is reclaiming uranium mines and investing in food and energy security. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are creating a joint military force, shared currency, and biometric passports under a new alliance of Sahel states. And in Senegal, President Faye is auditing resource contracts and laying the groundwork for the economic sovereignty. Now, some people may disagree with him because he was just at the White House begging for American money. But, you know, there are some disagreements on him, but he is young and he has always, and he ran as a radical. So this isn't a trend. It is a tectonic shift. And we'll also talk about Ghana and their changes that they've made recently as well. Maybe Muhammad's not as young, but he is taking a bold stance that's very similar to what we're hoping to see more of across the continent and what we're seeing in the Sahel region. So with that, I want to go play this next video that gives a little bit more context to all of the older leaders and some of the newer ones and gives us a little bit of hope, maybe, potentially. So let's play that and have some commentary on the other side.
Salva Kiir, the 71-year-old president of South Sudan, wetting himself on live TV. Here he is again, struggling to figure out how earphones work while sitting across from Vladimir Putin. And here is Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu at COP28.
So critical steps to reduce methane emission by ensuring flood gas are eliminated. There's a huge penalty for that. There's equally a huge incentive to do so. The measures that were taken.
What was that? Delegates are still trying to understand what he was saying. And then there's Cameroon's Paul Biya, 92 years old. Yes, you heard that right, 92. He looks completely lost. Now, we are not here to roast old men, but let's be honest, much of Africa is being run by leaders who are too tired, too confused, and too compromised to lead. And while they cling to power like it's a family heirloom, a new political cadre is rising, a new Pan-African Guard. In Burkina Faso, 37-year-old Captain Ibrahim Traoré is building the country's first state-owned gold refinery. He's keeping the wealth in the hands of the Burkinabe people, not giving it away to foreign corporations. He's expelled their propaganda machines, he's fighting terror groups all over the country, and is doing justice to the legacy of the country's revolutionary leader, Thomas Sankara. In Niger, General Abdurrahman Chani has nationalized uranium mines. He expelled French forces and corporations and is prioritizing investment into agriculture and solar energy. They are not just talking about sovereignty, they are exercising it. Together with Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger have formed the Alliance of Sahel States. It's a regional bloc with plans to introduce a new currency and create a common market. The AES hopes to assemble a 5,000-strong joint military force to fight terrorism without begging for French or US help. It's also rolling out a shared biometric passport. This allows free movement throughout the bloc, strengthening a sense of Pan-African identity. In Senegal, President Bassirou Diomaye Faye has started auditing oil, gas and mining contracts, reviewing sweetheart deals made under former governments. He's launched a 25-year plan to break out of debt dependency and reclaim national wealth. The Sangoma offshore field has come online, producing 100,000 barrels a day. It marks Senegal's official entry into the League of Petroleum Producers. Faye has also asked the French to close their bases and leave by the end of 2025. From Bamako to Niamey, Ouagadougou to Dakar, this is a noise. It's a movement. New African leaders are building African-owned institutions, challenging neo-colonial exploitation and putting dignity before dependency. So, while dinosaurs are paying themselves, fumbling with earpieces or mumbling incoherently at global summits, the new Pan-African Guard is making history. The era of French puppets, IMF yes-men, and colonial leftovers is fading. The age of self-determination is upon us. The old rulers must step aside and let new, brilliant minds deliver the future that we Africans have been longing for decades.
And there's William from African Stream. We so miss African Stream. For sure. That's one of the last videos they did before they shut down. But I wanted to play that because I think there's a hope, right? And for many people, and I think that's what they're seeing in the AES block. But your thoughts on this last video and the need for new leadership?
Yes, part of why many Africans love Traoré is because it's refreshing, almost radical, to finally see someone that young and assertive stepping into power in a continent where leadership is often monopolized by aging politicians and recycled elites. Yep. Seeing someone like Traoré disrupts the norm. So it basically signals possibility, and that's why a lot of Africans embrace him. Keep in mind, Africa has the youngest continent, or Africa is the youngest continent. So this isn't to ridicule anyone, but it really is a wake-up call. Joe, even though you didn't mention his name, you referenced Joe Biden, and somebody else, compared Paul Biya with Joe Biden. By the end of the day, Joe Biden did step down. When there were calls for him, because cognitively and physically, it was obvious the man needed to retire and rest. He knew what time it was, and he stepped down. He chose not to run for a second term. Let's bring it to Africa. Mandela served one term, and age was actually one of the key reasons he only served one term. Part of why many Africans love Traoré again is because it's like, wow, this is different, this is new. So these people are setting themselves up for this ridicule. It's not good for their dignity, but they don't care. As long as they have power, they think that's enough compensation. And the reason they are able to stay in power as long as they have is due to their ability to maintain tight control of institutions and suppress dissent. But there's usually, hopefully, well, some people will say hopefully, a tipping point. And in Biya's case, there was actually a coup attempt shortly after he came into power, I think the year after. But his government responded with force, and that led to casualties. Another thing that African leaders do to help tighten their grip on power is they have a pre-election purge to prevent coup plots and dissent. After this announcement that Biya, for instance, made, he reshuffled the military's top brass. I mean, people just started getting promotions. You get a promotion, you get a promotion, everybody got a promotion. Infantry, Air Force, Navy, clearly doing it to secure loyalty, especially with all the growing public anxiety over his extended rule. And to think that he is the world's oldest serving head of state and doesn't know when to quit. Like, bro, is there some record you're trying to beat? Because if he wins this election, he will be 100, like you said, Joe. He will be 100 years old by the end of that term. This would make him the first modern elected African leader to govern as a centenarian. Scary. And what is even more scary, again, is that Africa is the youngest continent, but it's often ruled by people who are much older.
Well put. I mean, yeah, you know, there's a story in the United States of when they were founding the United States, and I usually use this as a parallel just because many people who watch this are from the United States, and they say that Ben Franklin, although many people wanted him to be president at the time, he said he was too old. Politics was a young man's game, and that's why he did not run for president. So people might be confused as why he's on, you know, many of the currencies. He's on the currencies in the United States. He wasn't actually a president, and sadly, some people think he was a president if you ask them in America. But he chose not to run because he was there for the Declaration of Independence and many of the early stages, and chose not to because he felt he was too old. And I just think that, you know, it's important that you have people who understand, you know, it should be those who are younger, who have new ideas and fresh ideas, operating and running the country. I know that people want people with a lot of experience, but I think what happens with experience comes cynicism and lack of imagination. And what you have is folks that end up just with the status quo. Somebody just says, Ben Franklin also said, if you have a republic, you have a republic if you can keep it. Very well said, especially in the case of in the case where we're talking here, where you no longer have those, right? Okay, so really quickly before we move on to the next story, I saw you acknowledge this. So somebody is asking about the source of your fabrics you wear, the seamstress, please.
Yeah, so this was actually ready-made. It was a gift when I was in Abuja, Nigeria. My husband actually got it for me. So it was like here, because I'd wanted this style, and he just randomly came home one day and brought it. And I was like, yay. So I didn't ask for the source, sorry. But it was ready-made somewhere in Abuja, Nigeria.
Yeah, and maybe one day I could potentially have it listed on site. Okay, so some other comments based on so I just wanted to put that out there quickly. Some other comments based on this. So Tim Black says, the ancient dictators make me sad. They leave their country with no infrastructure, failing power grids, no hospitals, but they run off to Europe for the cold and have billions in the bank. On that note, we will talk about that in a second. We do want to pivot to the aftermath of the Africa Summit in the White House last week. If you all remember, there were some viral moments. In fact, Liberia's president expressed that he was honored to meet with the U.S. President Donald Trump last week and did not take offense to Trump's remark regarding his English fluency, which, of course, is his native language, as stated by Liberia's foreign minister last Friday. So let's go ahead and play what his thoughts were following the interesting time at the White House.
Liberia's President Joseph Boakai expressed that he was honored to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump last week and did not take offense at Trump's remark regarding his English fluency, which is his native language, as stated by Liberia's foreign minister last Friday. Last week, Wednesday, Trump commended President Joseph Boakai for his proficiency in English, seemingly obvious to the fact that English is Liberia's official language. According to the Liberian Foreign Minister Sarah Solo Nyanti, it was a privilege to receive an invitation from the White House for President Boakai to meet with President Trump and other African leaders, and no offense was taken at Trump's remarks.
I can't tell other people how to be offended. But thoughts, Gloria.
Bro, so why are we over here fighting? Actually, it's not you we're fighting for. We're fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for our dignity. But I'm not actually surprised, because you clearly are more concerned about appeasing Trump than about standing with your people. So there's no shock here. Matter of fact, I was shocked. And Joe, I sent this video to you initially because I saw it and I was like, whoa, Joseph Boakai is standing up to Trump. But of course, it wasn't a real video. So I was shocked when I saw a video with him expressing his disappointment at Trump for giving him a compliment on his English. Halfway through the video, because as soon as I saw it, I sent it to Joe, but I hadn't finished it. And I went back to watch it. And then halfway through the video, I was like, nah, this is definitely fake. And it turned out to be. Yep. Isn't it sad that we don't expect our leaders to stand up for themselves and by extension, the continent when it matters? And yes, diplomacy is great. It's necessary, but not when our dignity takes a hit. But the fact that he isn't offended does not mean that Africans shouldn't be, because it's all about our collective dignity.
100%. And I'll just say that, when you rely so heavily on someone, you're willing to overlook things that you might normally take issue with, right? And so I think this just comes back to that same conversation we've been having about Africa relying on itself, intracontinental trade, and and taking control of our resources. Because until we do, you'll have many moments like this where people are, basically begging for foreign investment and, basically taking disrespect as a compliment. So with that, let's move on to the next story. So this one is specific to Nigeria. Obviously, they were not invited. And there's been some comments and some conversations internally within the country saying that Trump snubbed Nigeria, and opposition blames Bola Tinubu. So the absence of Nigeria obviously triggered somewhat of a, people would say, a domestic crisis for the president, President Tinubu. The Nigerian opposition is up in arms, accusing him of denting the country's stature. The newly formed opposition coalition, which we talked about last week, the African Democratic Congress, the ADC, criticized Tinubu, saying that Nigeria's global reputation is slipping under his rule. Its leader and former minister, Abdullahi, called the American snub a damning international indictment. Failing to secure an American invitation points out strained ties between the U.S. and Nigeria. The U.S. has imposed new visa restrictions on Nigeria and announced an additional 10% tariff on its goods recently. Meanwhile, the Nigerian government has pushed back on accepting Venezuelans deported from the U.S. With that, let's play this video and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Continuing with updates from the ongoing Africa Summit in the U.S., while leaders from 5 African nations are in Washington, D.C., the absence of an African powerhouse has triggered a domestic crisis for its leaders. We are talking about Nigeria, which is seemingly being snubbed by Donald Trump. While Abuja has maintained a complex relationship with both the West and Russia, not being invited by Washington for the summit could indicate shifting alliances. The Nigerian opposition is up in arms, blaming President Bola Tinubu for denting the country's stature. The newly formed opposition coalition, the African Democratic Congress, or the ADC, criticized Tinubu, saying that Nigeria's global reputation is slipping under his rule. Its leader and former minister, Malam Bolaji Abdullahi, had called the American snub a damning international indictment. He said that the U.S. chose to bypass a nation with the largest consumer market for much smaller African economies. Nigeria is one of the largest economies in Africa, and failing to secure an American invitation does seem concerning. But this is not a standalone incident. It points fingers at strained ties between the U.S. and Nigeria. Earlier this week, the U.S. imposed new visa restrictions on Nigeria, And now, Nigerians who seek to travel to the US on non-immigrant visas will only receive a permit for a single entry in 3 months.
All right, the video is quite long, so if you guys want to watch it, you can go to African Post or First Post to watch the rest of it. But yeah, Gloria, your thoughts on the couple of things that they touched, right? The fact that the new opposition party seems to be conflating two things. You know, the view of Nigeria globally, and also the Africa Summit and Nigeria not being there, and then also the visa restrictions.
Yeah, I would like to start with the ADC, the new coalition, which is the opposition, criticizing Tinubu for Nigeria's exclusion from the White House. I mean, last week we talked about how bigger economies were also not invited. I do get the ADC's point, but it is beyond that. It could be Nigeria's recent entry into BRICS+6. And as for Trump's new visa restrictions on Nigeria, and Joe, you sent me a link this morning, it's not just Nigeria. Apparently, you also have Ghana, Cameroon, and Ethiopia. But back to Nigeria, there are speculations that Nigeria reportedly refusing U.S. migrants could have triggered it, but the U.S. has denied this. Now, the U.S. Embassy is saying it's about visa reciprocity and concerns about visa overstays. To be fair, and I'm not, supporting the move, but I have seen a U.S. citizen get a 3-month visa to Nigeria before. This was as far back as 2008. And I was wondering then, wow, so if you stay beyond 3 months, are they going to deport you?
Right. Absolutely not. As you know. You just pay a little fine at the airport.
Oh, that's how that works?
Generally, yes.
Oh, so just another way for you to get more money. Got it. Why 3 months, though, to be fair? I mean, I don't know if they changed that and people are getting many more years, but I know I saw this with my eyes that, it was a thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so what I understand is the restriction is on multiple entry visas. So you can only come in once and you can't leave again. So let's say you come to Nigeria and you decide you want to go to Canada. I'm sorry, you come from Nigeria to the US on a visa. You decide you want to go to Canada. You cannot come back into the United States. So basically just says you come in for the length of your visa. You cannot come back. And if you want to leave to go back to Nigeria, for instance, then you have to apply again for a new visa. That, as from what I understand, and that, yes, as you mentioned, it looks like it's for a number of different countries, not just Nigeria. I do feel that they're conflating those two things. I think two things can be true, that potentially the view of Nigeria on the world stage can be declining. I think that there's probably some PR that can be done because I think Nigeria, much like India, has a lot of folks in the medical field. And also, like India, has a lot of negative press around it, in terms of the online hacking scams, etc. But for whatever reason, when discussed about the two countries, India, for some reason, the all of what they do with the call centers and all of that happens there doesn't get brought up. It's mostly the engineers and doctors, but with Nigeria, most of the scamming is what comes up. I think it's interesting, and I think that there's some work to be done there. I do not think that him being invited to the White House has much to do with that. I think that there's other reasons, and there are other things that can be done there. I always called out India and Nigeria because they're both giant economies and both have upward mobility as immigrants to other countries, but for whatever reason, and they both have some of the negative instances happening within their countries, but for whatever reason, one is seen differently than the other. So I always use them as two countries to look at and see why people perceive them in the way that they do. But anyway, in this case, them not being invited to the White House, I think, has nothing to do with their international reputation, because there's a lot of countries with bad international reputations, and as long as they, are buying arms from the U.S., Saudi Arabia, or or others, I'll just use Saudi Arabia as an example because that one won't get me into trouble. They're fine, right? Other countries who buy arms from the U.S., who do a lot of other things, bombing other countries, etc., seem to be fine. So anyway, with that, I want to move on to the next story because there was one more that was a viral moment that came out of that particular meeting. And, in July, of course, as you know, a number of folks were there, And Gabon's president returned from the United States wearing a MAGA hat, reportedly autographed by Donald Trump. So upon his arrival, he's seen dancing publicly. And this moment was captured by several viral videos, obviously spread across the African social media and news outlets, triggering widespread debate and controversy. Some saw it as a bold or strategic diplomatic gesture, possibly aiming to signal realignment or openness to a new international partnerships outside of France's traditional influence on Gabon. Others, including critics and many everyday Africans, viewed it as a display of embarrassing and inappropriate, especially given how the current president of the United States has talked about Africa and just what happened at the summit itself. So I do want to get to that video. You guys may have seen it, but in case you haven't, this is a video going viral right now. Video's longer if you want to watch the rest of it. You know, it doesn't say make Gabon great again. It says make America great again, which is interesting. Thoughts though, Gloria?
Oh, we didn't get to the part where it was actually waving the hat around. Oh man, Nguema gave a show. Last week, I said that the leaders at that White House summit were basically giving pick me vibes. Like, wow, look at me, Trump. My minerals are so shiny.
Right.
And now they've gone back to their countries and they feel the need to keep impressing Trump. From the president of Liberia saying he didn't have a problem with what Trump said, to Nguema now dancing. Clearly, he knew there would be people recording that stuff. So coming out, rocking the MAGA hat proudly, you know, and that hat was reportedly signed by Trump. I guess everyone has to prove their solidarity however they can.
Right.
And at the end of the day, this was a man who took over not too long ago through a coup, and now he's, I guess, become a legitimate president because, you know, there was an election, etc. But flaunting such partisan imagery in a country that is still rebuilding after crushing the Bongo dynasty is very interesting optics. But one thing I will say, though, the people seem to love him. Or so it seems, I don't know. But I mean, we haven't heard much complaint from people from Gabon, but they seem to love him. So I guess we'll keep watching.
Yes, absolutely. A statement from Tim Black. I'll leave it for you all to read. Okay. So now moving on back to Nigeria. And, you know, the discussion of aging African leaders. You know, Nigeria's former president, Buhari, has passed. He was in power from 2015 to 2023. He was known for his no-nonsense style of leadership, but was criticized for his handling of the economy and for his crackdown on protesters at the Lekki toll gate. That was the demonstrations in 2020, the NSARS protests, where live rounds of ammunition were fired on people and many experienced loss of life. So I just want to remember that it was a very, very devastating experience. He was in power before, came to power in a coup. I know that you know the details of the history there. And then he came back to power later as the head of the APC party. We're going to play a video here, and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Buhari was a military dictator turned Democrat. In 2015, he took the oath of office as a president elected by the people. And as the first presidential candidate to defeat a sitting leader, it was a remarkable moment in the country's history. It was in 1983 that he first ruled the country, taking power in a coup. As a young officer, he rapidly rose through the army ranks during a time when Nigeria was experiencing frequent regime changes. When he came to power, the economy was in turmoil and official corruption was rampant. He vowed to come down hard.
Fraud, indiscipline, corruption, squandermania.
His time in power is best remembered for campaigns against what he called squandermania, but also for human rights abuses. But the general who promised to clean up the system didn't last long. After 20 months, he was himself ousted in a coup. It was only after the restoration of democracy in Nigeria at the turn of the century that Muhammadu Buhari once again became a prominent figure in public life. Never a natural politician, he was seen as aloof and austere, but he retained a reputation for personal honesty, a rare feat for a politician in Nigeria.
Corruption has virtually been developed into a culture in Nigeria. From the day we are sworn in as a government, anybody who abuses trust will be called to account.
After 3 failed attempts, he was elected the country's leader for 2 consecutive terms. His time in office coincided with a slump in global oil prices and the country's worst economic crisis in decades. His administration also came under fire for its handling of insecurity. Whilst campaigning, he promised to defeat the extremist group Boko Haram. He had some success. Security improved in the northeast of the country, and he subsequently oversaw the return of over 100 out of nearly 300 schoolgirls kidnapped in Chibok in 2014. But after a spate of recent attacks in Borno State, Boko Haram remains an ever-present threat to the country. And under Buhari's watch, armed forces were accused of human rights abuses, like opening fire on anti-police brutality protesters at the Lekki toll gate in Lagos in October 2020. To his critics, his rigid military style and economic policies did more harm than good. But to his supporters, he was a stern yet honest leader who tried to bring order to an often fractious and chaotic country.
So as a Nigerian, your thoughts here on the life and time in office of Buhari?
Yeah, so there are 2 things I would like to talk about regarding his passing. One, the fact that he passed on at a hospital in London. Now, that is very ironic because it shows that even he had no trust in Nigeria's healthcare system. And that is odd because substantial funds were allocated and budgeted for the State House Clinic during his administration. Also, he pledged during his campaign to end medical tourism, but he ended up spending 230 days in London over 8 years, more than any Nigerian president before him. Taxpayers footed the bill while local hospitals remained underfunded and without basic supplies. So people are right to question why he sought treatment abroad instead of using and even strengthening the domestic healthcare facilities. And he isn't the only one. President Musa Yar'Adua passed on in Saudi Arabia. There are reports that President Tinubu goes to Europe for healthcare. Even former military head of state Abdul Salami Abubakar actually admitted that he too was in the same London hospital as Buhari. So our leaders do not trust the systems they once governed or are governing. There is a pattern where not just Nigeria's, but Africa's top leadership relies on foreign healthcare. So if leaders have to go abroad, what hope is there for the masses? And it isn't because African doctors aren't amazing. My goodness, they thrive abroad. It's simply because our leaders aren't equipping African nations with needed infrastructure and support. Second, there have been mixed reactions to his passing. Some people are mourning, others are celebrating. His supporters remember him as someone who was disciplined, someone with integrity. Many, and I don't want to quantify it, so let me say some are criticizing him for economic mismanagement and his heavy-handed responses to protests like EndSARS in 2020. Now, these mixed reactions reveal something profound about the legacy of power in Africa. When a leader passes on and the people rejoice, we have to go beyond seeing it as disrespect. What that is it's a verdict. Yeah, it may not seem fair in every case, and it doesn't always look mature or graceful, but still it is a verdict. People do not mourn power. They mourn compassion. They mourn those who made them feel seen. So when Nigerians responded with bitterness, some were even mocking him, it wasn't really about Buhari the man. It was about Buhari the symbol. A symbol of promises unkept, silence in moments of pain, visible distance between him, the ruler, and the ruled. Nigeria is a country where during fuel crisis, joblessness, police brutality, university strikes. Many people felt abandoned, and it's because his governance did not have proximity to their suffering. So to those who say respect the deceased, people have actually asked, did the deceased in their years of influence show respect for the living? Because reverence in mortality is earned by humility in life. You cannot demand that people give flowers when someone passes on if that person trampled the people's gardens while they were alive. But we must also caution against becoming what we despise. If we mock every passing tyrant and then we enable the next one, we have learned nothing. And to African leaders who are still on earth, this is the lesson. You will not control your obituary. The people who will write it, the market woman, the protester, the unemployed graduate, the grieving parent, these are the people who will write your obituary. So govern as if your funeral were tomorrow. Govern as if children would read the comments under your memorial post. So this isn't about shaming the deceased, but it's about awakening the living. People are watching and they are writing. What is it that they will write about you when you leave?
Well put. I don't really have much else to add there. I will just say that when I was deciding where to move in West Africa and I was choosing Anglophone countries, right? Countries that speak English. It was at the moment that the NSARS protest happened and what happened there that led me to choose Accra over Lagos, actually. When I was thinking about what cities that I wanted to move to and why I moved to Ghana. And that was under Buharis' rule. I was starting to really get into West African news and paying attention to local news outlets, and everything that I was hearing just led me to say, this is not a place that I want to live.
Wow.
And so I'll just leave it at that and move on to the next story. So with that, because, you've said it all. And in the interest of time, South Africa's 30% tariff crisis on, so white farmers are panicking as Ramaphosa scrambles. So in his second term, President Trump vocally and controversially championed white South Africans. As you guys remember, he offered asylum to number 60 something, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But now his threatened 30% tariff on South African exports could deal a blow to that very same community. That community that he said was being genocided. His now potential tariffs will have an issue, will be an issue for them. So we have a video and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
In his second term, U.S. President Donald Trump has vocally and controversially championed white South Africans. Citing false claims that they are being persecuted in South Africa, Trump has cut aid to the country and invited Afrikaners, descendants of early European settlers, to come to the United States as refugees. But now, Trump's threatened 30% tariff on South African exports could deal a blow to that same community. Christian Moten is a sixth-generation farmer in Western Cape Province's citrus heartland.
It doesn't make sense for us to welcome South African farmers in America, and then the rest that stays behind that wants to secure food security, to punish them for not going to America.
After a 3-month pause, Trump escalated his trade war on Monday, targeting over a dozen countries, including South Africa, with steep so-called reciprocal tariffs effective August 1st. The White House said the measures are aimed at addressing what Trump called unfair trade imbalances. With 3/4 of South Africa's freehold land white-owned, white farmers will be among those to face the immediate economic fallout. The country is the world's second-largest exporter of citrus fruit, after Spain, and while the United States accounts for only 6% of South Africa's citrus exports, some farming areas produced specifically for the U.S. market.
Farmers will go bankrupt. For sure there would be job losses within our sector. So the impact is enormous. I don't even want to think about it.
So, thoughts on the tariffs and impacting the protected class now. Has always been a protected class, but now
right.
American protected class of South Africa.
Yeah, the pain of this move was definitely immediate. The South African Reserve Bank estimates up to 100,000 jobs at risk. The rand also weakened. So the impact was felt. Now, regarding the claim of unfair trade deals, Cyril Ramaphosa has explained that this is inaccurate and points out that most US imports enter South Africa duty-free, while local tariffs average only 7.6%. Now, back in June, we actually talked about how Cyril had opened negotiations and sent detailed proposals hoping to reduce the levy. A decade ago, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, granted duty-free access that helped integrate South Africa into global markets. The current tariff threatens to unravel that progress. We've all seen the drama around the claims of a white genocide in South Africa, so that makes this sting even harder because the white farmers that Trump has been protecting are going to be hit hard. These farmers, many of whom supported Trump or felt emboldened by his allegations, are now calling it a betrayal. And in a strange twist, it's President Ramaphosa, the same leader whom many of these farmers feared due to land reform policies. He's the one now fighting to save their jobs and shield them from economic impact of the tariffs. And even though, sadly, it is most whites who own farms in South Africa, and some people think that this may be karma, it's ultimately a loss for the entire nation because you have Black farm workers and small suppliers who are entrenched in these value chains. But the big takeaway is that African leaders should stop assuming goodwill when it comes to global trade. Even systems like AGOA can be revoked suddenly. So we need more economic foresight because foreign political interests do not come with loyalty, only leverage. No one is exempt from global fallout. And when a country gets hit, the people end up paying the price.
Well put. In the interest of time, I'll leave it there. There were some other stories that we wanted to cover. Really quickly, we'll mention that Kenya is offering visa-free travel to all Africans except for two nations. It's Libya and Eritrea. Am I right? And then we had a number of other stories that we don't have time to go through, unfortunately. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to try to cover in the last couple of minutes that we have here.
Do you have to jump off?
I do, but you can go if you want. If you want to go through the rest of the stories, you can if you'd like to.
Oh, it's all up to you. Okay. Well, maybe I'll just run through them. The Kenya visa-free travel. I mean, we've been hearing talks about this, and it is a great way to decolonize travel, I think, because we actually need that throughout the continent. And, this will be great for Kenya. Trade, tech, a lot of things will improve as a result. I mean, obviously, we do have to be concerned, just be mindful of the security, because, I mean, Kenya's history with Al-Shabaab and its proximity to unstable regions could actually pose as a risk. But as long as that's been, taken care of, that would be great because we don't want a security nightmare. Now, that said, is this about public relations and image repair? Because, I mean, Kenya's international reputation has taken a hit in recent years, no thanks to Ruto's continual crackdown on protesters. So I do like the idea of visa liberalization, and it makes Kenya look welcoming and forward-thinking. But this is a country still dealing with dissatisfaction, So I guess symbolism has power. Even if it is partly PR, it still opens real doors, especially for Africans who are used to having all these barriers when they're traveling.
Absolutely. And look, at the end of the day, right, if you look at other continents, there's a lot of free travel, especially Europe, right? Free movement between countries. Visas are not required to move between them. And that's why they're some of the most traveled people. Right? When you meet people from the UK or Spain or Italy, they've been to all other parts of Europe and then other parts of the world. And so love to see more of this on the continent of Africa. I do think this is a distraction, but also it's a necessary, it's necessary. And this is something they announced actually in 2023. Now with that, I do have to jump, but
okay.
I want to leave this in Gloria's capable hands. If you want to go through the rest of the stories, feel free, because I think there's still people still engaged, still commenting, still watching. So I think Gloria can finish out the live stream, and then you can close it out. And then what I will say is, for those of you watching, thanks again for watching. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, follow on both channels. I have to jump for another call.
Don't forget the fabric.
Yeah, There it is. There's the fabric. You know, we'll see. We'll try to find out who it is and see if I can put it on my site at one point. Okay, so I'm gonna jump, but we will see you. I will see you guys all next week.
Bye,
See you,
Joe.
Gloria. Yeah, I will hop off and I'll see you guys later.
Bye, Joe.
Bye.
See you next week. Okay, so just going to run through the headlines. This is news around Africa. We're going to start with U.S. migrant deals. We've discussed the U.S. seeking to outsource migrant deportations to African nations. Rwanda has shown interest in this deal, as we once shared. South Sudan has reportedly accepted 8 migrants. Nigeria is said to have refused the request. And as you know, the Trump administration has made it clear, if you do not accept these deportees, you're going to face the consequences. And, you know, matter of fact, during the mini summit at the White House, you know, he kept talking to them about accepting the deportees. So that's the update on that. I guess Africa is becoming more of a dumping ground than we ever thought it would be. Very unfortunate. Now to Libya. So more than 100 migrants were held for ransom. And man, maybe we can talk about this some other time, because Joe had an experience he wanted to share, or something he had witnessed that he wanted to share regarding this trafficking of migrants. But in Libya, more than 100 migrants who were held for ransom by human traffickers finally got released. And this was due to a raid by Libyan security forces. Now, the captives were mostly from sub-Saharan Africa. They were reportedly tortured while their families were pressured to send money for their release. So even though this specific network has reportedly been dismantled by authorities, Libya is still a hub for smuggling routes to Europe. So, you know, a lot has happened since Gaddafi, and it's just unfortunate. We've heard of slavery happening in Libya, and now, I mean, and this trafficking has been going on, you know, secretly, and sometimes they clamp it down, but it's a lot of cases that we're not aware of. Now to South Africa. I'd say this is the stuff that James Bond movies are made of. Police Minister Senzo Mchini has been suspended due to allegations involving links to organized crime and political killings, allegedly. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has placed him on precautionary leave pending the outcome of formal inquiries. So that's where we are with that. If you get into that story, it's obviously trending hard in South Africa. It's mind-boggling. Now the Trump administration has proposed deep funding cuts that would affect HIV research, and it would actually prevent globally programs like PEPFAR, which could have been critical across Africa, or which have been critical across Africa. Now, the UN has warned that if there is no new funding, up to 4 million people could pass on due to AIDS, and 6 million could actually become newly infected by 2029. So basically, decades of progress in the fight against HIV/AIDS could be lost because of this situation. Now to the Central African Republic. In the Central African Republic, the government has once again postponed its presidential election, which is sadly the norm. With this postponement, the Central African Republic marks nearly 40 years of electoral instability. This constant delays keeps serving the interest of the elites, but the ordinary citizens, they just continue to suffer. It's just so sad. Back to Kenya. President William Ruto is building a new church, a massive new church within the State House compound. And this is going to reportedly seat up to 8,000 worshipers. And the cost is actually estimated to be around $9 million. Now, his supporters are saying it's a spiritual symbol of national unity. But critics, see it as tone deaf. It's tone-deaf extravagance in a time of economic hardship and disillusionment. Like, what are your priorities, Ruto? Like, what exactly is going on? And then finally, Joe sent me this story. It has to do with Ghana. I hope I have that story. So Mahama is doing great things in Ghana, as we know. And let me just get that. bear with me. So Ghana, this is according to New Ghana on Instagram, Ghana earned $5 billion from exporting nearly 52 tons of gold between January and May 2025, solidifying its position as a leading gold producer in West Africa. And that's it. That's news around Africa. We've come to the end of the show. Thank you all so much for sticking with us. Tim Black, I feel you. I hear you. I agree with you. You say you're not sure, but you believe that if the African continent would trade more with each other, the tariffs from America would not have that much effect. I completely agree. I've always been about intertrade within Africa. I've always been about regional partnership. Instead of, I don't think we need anybody outside the continent. Let them come to us and partner with us. We need nobody from any part of the world, really. I'm okay with us being self-sufficient. And even if we do go out, I hope we can reach out to nations that actually share the struggles that we share or we once shared, which is colonialism and neocolonialism. So it would be nice for us to actually reach out to these to certain countries, like in the Caribbean, as I mentioned, and just have something refreshing. We need new partnerships, but it has to be a real fair partnership. We don't need to go outside the continent. Let me see if there's anything else. Let's see here. Nathan _02 wrote, _02, I think that's O. Older leaders that are not cognitive are at risk of being manipulated by those around them. I think that is one reason they stay in office. Interesting. Okay, well, thank you so much for your comment. Yeah, Tim Black, you also had some thoughts on how certain Africans are treated by people from a certain continent, which I will not mention, but it's right here in the comments. In East Africa, you say they treat Black Africans like untouchables. Oh my goodness. And you pray that one day African leaders will stand up and stop running to white saviors and Asian saviors, is what he wrote. Interesting. What else do we have here? I'm going to wrap up in just a bit. Let's see here. I'm trying to find comments that we haven't read. Common Sense 1959, you wrote, the D word people end up with fake leaders. So what you're suggesting is that until the people stand up, these things keep happening, huh? And yeah, you added, blame the people in these African countries who have these Western puppets as their leaders. Some would agree with that and that's why Kenyans, the Gen Zs in Kenya are getting a lot of love, because they're doing that which many people on the continent are afraid to do. And even though, to be fair, I say this a lot, we can all blame one another and say, why aren't we fighting? But I don't think I even have the right to say that, because at the end of the day, it could take just one person. Why isn't one person on the continent fighting? So it's just how I try to see it. And it's not to say we shouldn't rally and fight for our continent. But this is why a country like Kenya really stands out, because they're doing that which many thought could not be done. And it's not just once, they keep doing it. During NSARS, the Nigerian youth were referred to as the coconut head generation. Coconut because, the shell of a coconut is really hard. And that was because they did not care. They were ready to fight till the end. Of course, unfortunately, that ended in disaster. But I see that with the Kenyans. And I think Togolese people at some point, when they were fighting the government of Faure Nyasimbe, they fought. I mean, we're not hearing much about that protest anymore. I think the buzz kind of died down, but they fought. So we do have this, and perhaps it'll be like a case of the Arab Springs or the Arab Spring. We don't know. We'll keep watching. Somebody wrote, Mason WWE 316, you wrote, as a Nigerian American, I find this very funny and pathetic. You're referring to the video we played earlier showing the aging African leaders, and Tinubu was one of those people. I'm guessing that's what you're referring to. And what else? They're the weapon fashioned against us. That's from Real Marcel 2's. Real Marcel 2. So you are also referring to the aging presidents throughout the continent. Let's see what else we have. The people need to revolt against him. Red is referring to Paul Biya, because that was at the very beginning of the show. And thank you so much for loving our channel as well, guys. Keep the comments coming. You know, every time you like, every time you comment, every time you share, you help us get African stories out there. You help us get our platform out there. As you know, African Stream has been shut down, and we're just trying to amplify African voices. The algorithm is not very favorable to stories from Africa. So when you do things like comment on our posts, when you do things like watching the show, you're really helping boost the continent, and we appreciate you so much for that. Don't forget, you can follow us on all socials at authentic_African, Authentic African on all social media platforms. And I am the Gloria Ayo on all social media platforms. Again, I share African stories. And if you'd like to learn about history and current affairs, I am your girl. Thank you all so much. And we will see you next week, same time, 10 a.m. What time do we start? 10 a.m. Eastern time. And I think that is 3 p.m. West African time. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.